Channel 10 Nelson, your community access television. Programming on this channel is made by local volunteers. If you would like to be a part of your community television, please call 354-4200 or write to Shaw Cable, 613 Ward Street, Nelson, B1L1T2.
Our next speaker is Greg Utsick. He's a forest consultant specializing in forest planning, soil mapping, and research, looking at the impacts of forest management on long-term productivity. He works on contract for Ministry of Forests, Canada Forests, Forestry Service, forest companies, loggers, and watershed groups. He's also a director of the West Arm Watershed Alliance and a representative for the Kootenay Lake Watershed Alliance and the Nelson Watershed on various committees. He periodically works on community agroforestry projects in Africa and Central America. Please welcome Greg Utsick.
I guess I should apologize to Bernie for coming up here to speak, being one of those myriad of consultants and bureaucrats left over. Although I have worked with Bernie, so. I've been specifically asked to comment on these issues from the point of view of a consultant. So rather than push my personal views, I'm going to try and comment more on how I see the process going on and how I see technical people fitting into that process. I like to think that I sit in somewhat of a unique position in these arguments. I'd like to say I sit on the middle ground, hopefully. I generally find myself contracted by the Ministry of Forests, sometimes by the forest industry, to research particular forest management problems. But at the same time, I'm also often a spokesperson for watershed committees and various environmental groups. For me, I don't find any shortage of common ground to stand on, and in fact, I find it quite easy to reconcile my environmental views with my work in forest management. However, more often than I like, my position seems to mean that I'm open to attack from both sides. Individuals within the Ministry of Forests and the forest industry refuse to hire me because I'm too biased, and my friends in the environmental movement distrust me because they heard me use the C word or even seen me associate with known loggers. So what I'd like to do with my short 5 minutes is to just outline some of the steps that I think are necessary before we start moving into this common ground. And could go into a lot of detail, but obviously 5 minutes doesn't allow that. Number one, I think there has to be free access to information and technical expertise. Technical experts should be equally available to all parties. Employees of the Ministry of Forests and industry should be free to participate in and provide honest and balanced technical opinions to public meetings. Both loggers and environmentalists have to begin to separate good logging from bad logging. Companies and contractors who continue to abuse the land have to be singled out and punished. As well, loggers who consistently perform to acceptable community standards should be singled out and rewarded, not only by the logging industry, by the government, but by environmentalists as well. Secondly, I think that all terms of reference for technical studies contracted by the Ministry of Forests or industry or watershed groups should be open to public input and review. Emphasis should be placed on finding innovative solutions, not just answering the question, should we log or shouldn't we? One group is surely not going to accept the outcome of the studies. It should be made clear to consultants that are responsible to all concerned, not just one side of the issue. Thirdly, we must agree on what the issues are. We need to clearly separate technical questions from social questions. we have to recognize that both kinds of issues are legitimate and essential to resolve. I would back up what Sam had to say in that light. The tendency has been to give technical questions priority and often to stretch technical arguments to cover social concerns. This puts technical experts in a very awkward position. People need to be honest and upfront about what your concerns are and have respect for the concerns of others. Fourthly, we need to recognize that forest management decisions are made on various levels, and all these levels interact with each other. The decision-making process has to be opened up to public scrutiny at all these levels, not just the bottom, so that decisions at one level are not contradicting decisions that are made at another level. Every new forest license issued means less areas will be reserved. Even the same as every streamside reserves means that the annual allowable cut should be reduced. People have to understand the implications of each decision. And lastly, I think that we have to stop trying to sell our arguments and views to outsiders in Victoria and Ottawa. Start putting our energy into working for compromises and agreement with people who live here. Too often we hear one side or the other rejoice with victory when we get a decision on a park proposal or a road location handed down from Victoria. I personally believe every time this happens, we all lose. We lose control of our destiny. We are in effect saying that we aren't mature enough to make our own decisions. We would rather give up control to some outsider, be it politicians or bureaucrats in Victoria or multinational boardrooms in Germany or Japan. For me, a decision acceptable to the majority of the people who choose to live here in the West Kootenays will always be the right decision, not one made by people trying to make a buck somewhere else.
Our next two speakers wish to share their 5 minutes. I believe Dick Granton is going to speak first. Is that right, Dick? Okay, and then Jane will follow him. She said something about if there's time, and she sort of hoped there wasn't going to be any time. Okay, Dick Granton is spokesperson, or pardon me, I'm putting words in his mouth. He's spokesman for the Kootenay Lake Woodlot Association. Jane Lake is, and these are Jane's words, she and her husband Roy have a woodlot license. She stays at home and behaves like a traditional woman doing the cooking and the books. I don't know of many traditional women who do the books. But the woodlot is a family affair. Please welcome these next two speakers, Dick and Jane.
I am an ex-assistant ranger. I got out of that when Forestry got out of the bush. And I became a shape maker, and I'm now a woodlot licensee. And I work with Roy and Jane and Chris. It's long been known by everyone here that industry's been in bed with the forestry, and the difference is that lately the public have been acting as peeping toms, and the pendulum is swinging. But whenever the pendulum swings, I feel justice departs. And I interpret this gathering as an effort to determine just where the pendulum's going to hang. We've all been bombarded by McMillan Bloedel's slick TV ads, by the emotionalism of the share groups, and by good old Mr. Suzuki. And so the polarization is therefore extreme and out of control. The next government has got to remedy this, and I feel that they've got a head start in the woodlot program. Woodlots are miniature TFLs. Hang on. The good parts of that are that they are long-term tenure, that there's a continuation of management, same guy as the woodlot, and that there's local control, and rather than foreign multinational control. There are about 470 woodlots in BC. Most of them are held by individuals. The demand exceeds the supply. The Ministry of Forests doesn't prioritize the issuing of woodlots in their workload. The main difference between woodlots and other types of tenure are the size and scale of operation. The maximum size for a woodlot can be 400 hectares, 1,000 acres. The size of the annual allowable cuts on woodlots vary a great deal from the coast to the interior because the tenure is area-based. The licensees are always local people. Therefore, local employment is created and community stability is enhanced. Further, there's a guaranteed annual timber supply to local communities for the development of secondary industry. You can't take the plunge into secondary industry unless you know you're going to get some wood somewhere. So woodlots will provide that on a small scale. Woodlots are suitable for contentious and or sensitive areas. However, some realities of woodlots are stumps, slash, noise, roads, and trucks. It's there, it's real, it's not inconspicuous. All silvicultural systems are employed in various woodlots across the province. Single tree selection, group selection, shelter wood cutting, and, perish the thought, the big C word. The difference lies in scale. It's small and it's slow. I'm going to eliminate this part because of time. In summary, woodlots provide an incentive for responsible forest management. A licensee or his chosen successors benefit directly. I can leave my woodlot to my kids. I can will it to my kids. You tend to think about a woodlot as being your own land and a means for your children to earn their livelihood. Obviously, this kind of perception leads to responsible management decisions and a long-term stewardship approach to what you do out there. Obviously, it doesn't make sense to convert BC's annual allowable cut to woodlots, but that would be much too fast. But an increase from the existing 0.8% of BC's cut to in the neighborhood of 10%, I think would go a long way toward finding middle ground. Thank you.
To begin with, I think Dick might have said that he works with Annie, because Annie does a lot, and that's one of the things I wanted to talk about, is that a woodlot is a family affair. I was talking to Annie on the phone, Dick's wife, about what we were going to say, and she doesn't think anything she has to say would be of interest to anybody here. And she was explaining to me about how it is that what she does on the woodlot, the physical work that she does, has nothing to do with what we're talking about here. And she stopped and she said, well, it's a family farm, and that's important. And it is important. We had a family farm with cows and potatoes and things where our children grew up. And it's very important for our children. I don't know how many young people that I don't even remember have said to me, we used to love to come to your place and see, there's always something going on. And there isn't that much activity at a woodlot, but the Brenton kids will go up there when they get a little, well, the little ones, when they get a little older, whether they like it or not, and they'll learn a lot and they'll share that. And it's very important. It's not a broad general answer, but it's an answer for a particular group, a small group of people. And I also wanted to tell you a little story about Roy. And he said to me, well, you know, I have this expensive hobby. and I want to grow trees. And to do that, I have to cut down trees to make room and to make some money to grow my trees. Not only that, he wants to grow black walnut trees, for God's sake. This man is not too far off from 60. So, I don't know how that could be more of combining care for the earth and a love of the earth with making a living by cutting down trees. And that's what I wanted to say.
To begin our second half of this forum today, we're very pleased to have a guest speaker with us. She's the MLA from Kootenai, that's Cranbrook, and of course her name is Ann Edwards. Will you please give us a warm welcome? Good afternoon. It's just great to come over from Cranbrook because then you get to be the guest speaker. Everybody else, of course, who was here wasn't the guest speaker, so remember that. I also wanted to take a minute, even though I only have a short time, to tell you about the latest rumors out of Victoria. We don't have a lot of time in Victoria lately, but we had a couple of weeks. And the latest rumor that's going around is that, I think this is on good authority, that the Premier has decided that since Lillian isn't doing much these days, he's asked her to embroider some of those sort of sampler things, you know, where you have an epigram and it's in needlepoint. And he's asked the same one for all his cabinet ministers, and the epigram that he has on all of them is, happiness is never having to say you're sorry. Well, I came over thinking about the middle ground, and you know, whether it's possible to find the middle ground. And to begin with, I want to say that yes, I believe that there is a middle ground. Obviously, I believe it, and I believe that it's an absolute necessity that we work toward finding that middle ground. When you are looking for the middle, though, I think it's a better idea to know what we're looking for. And so I thought about, you know, what basically a lot of people think, because the public perception is that the whole argument over resource use is between some guys over there. Which kooks do you want? You want the ones that advocate no use, or you want the ones that rape the forest? I mean, which is you know, these are the terrible extremes. And the general perception that there are only those two poles, and that everything goes on sort of a straight line between the two. Now, if that were the kind of middle you were looking for, it probably would be fairly simple to find, but that isn't the middle that we're looking for because it doesn't reflect the situation. First of all, it's very easy, even the media sometimes mentions that we have to involve Aboriginal people in every decision that we make. So immediately you've lost that polarization, because that brings us into other things. And it brings us into the fact that really what we're looking for in our resources is not just the fiber that we could extract from the forests, but we're also looking at spiritual things and the relief, the actual escape that comes to some recreationists. We're looking at other kinds of recreation. We're looking at heritage values. We're looking at tourism values. We're looking at all sorts of things, which really makes it look more like a circle. And if you were looking at a circle, you know there's still a middle there, but you know it's a little harder to find the middle in that. You could lay it out in a bunch of pies. And that, in some senses, would reflect the very two-dimensional sort of thing that we're looking at, but it's not even that simple when we're talking about our resources, and we're talking about our forests and our land and our water and our air and everything that grows on that land and in those environments, the whole ecosystem, the flora and the fauna. What we're really looking at, when you go a little more into it, because you find that native people, just like non-native people, would like to log some of the fiber in that forest, and that some kinds of recreationists have the very same recreation as some kinds of loggers. And when you look at all the interests like that,
you really have to decide that the middle of what you're looking for is really the center somehow of a sphere. That you have a number of people working and their interests intersect with other people's interests frequently. So you really have a three-dimensional situation with a number of interests operating more in orbit around a middle. Now that is, I think, more reflective of the difficulty of what we're dealing with. We are not dealing with anything that's two-dimensional or anything that's neat or anything that's simple. We're dealing with a very difficult situation. We've been dealing with it for years. As a matter of fact, when I first got into the business of having a lot to do with land managers in the Kootenays, I was in Cranbrook in 1969. I began working a lot with land managers and discovered that they were saying at that time we need a land use strategy. Now that situation seemed to be fairly new, that idea seemed fairly new at the time. The idea went away from, I don't know, is this sounding right? Okay, I'll leave it there then, it's kind of somewhere. But you know, the idea went from land managers, resource managers, to people whose part of the resource, you know, the people who saw the resource disappearing on them. They began to say we needed a land use strategy. And you know, the exciting part is that really after the last Parks Plan 90 hearings, the voice now is unanimous. We don't just have the managers who are the bureaucrats, the technicians, and the academics saying that we need a land use strategy, which must be based on a resource inventory. We now have the industry saying that. Now, the forest industry was probably the most notable holdout in deciding that we really didn't have an adequate resource inventory. Because the forest industry said, we know what we're dealing with. We don't need any more. Now they are not saying that. So to me, the most exciting thing about the Parks Plan 90 hearings, which by the way were attended in the greatest numbers and perhaps with the greatest degree of participation in the Kootenays, but the industry, the people who work in the industry, the recreationists, the environmentalists, everybody is now saying the same thing. And they are saying we need to have a resource use strategy. I changed the word to resource use because really it goes beyond land use. And they are saying that we need to base it on a real resource inventory. Now that resource inventory is something that, as I say, is not developed over at least 22 years. I can vouch for, because as I say, I began looking in 69, and that was being asked for within the ministries at that time. Well, I think that is extremely exciting, that we have a unanimous group working now toward getting this resource use strategy based on a resource inventory. I think the other part of that that's exciting is that everybody in this province, but particularly the people in the Kootenays, where the land use conflicts are extreme, are going to have the opportunity, at least before the year is out, to make a choice of political parties. And when you look at what we plan to do, and what we have indicated very clearly we plan to do, and at some of the work we've already started to do, we are committed to resource inventories. Look at the sheet that's on your chair. Resource inventories are basic to what we need to do. I've been asking for resource inventories ever since I got elected, and I know a lot of members of our party were asking for them long before, and there was never a commitment by the current government. The Socrats can't afford resource inventories. Now, their strongest supporters, the forest industry, are demanding that they have resource inventories, and they still haven't done anything about it. We are committed as well to local management. One way or the other, we have to have a regionalization that brings some decision-making into the region. And we've already started having meetings. I know you've had some here, and I know we've had some in our area, and we are committed to making sure that the people in the local regions are going to have a say in it. Now, as I say, it's not going to be simple and it's not going to be neat, and my quotation for today is an H.L. Mencken quotation, which some of you might have read. I just came across it in the Globe and Mail, Friday's Globe and Mail. And the quotation is, "For every human problem, there is a solution which is neat, simple, and wrong." Well, we know it's not going to be neat. We can try to make it more neat by having resource inventories. We know it isn't going to be simple, and I don't know that there's going to be any possibility of it ever being simple, but we have to see that our solution is not wrong. Thank you very much.
And the speaker that we'll be listening to now is Herb Hammond. Herb is the co-chairperson of the Slocan Valley Watershed Alliance. He's a forester with 20 years experience as a forest consultant, worked with Native people and environmental groups, and he developed the concept of holistic forest use, a stab at the middle ground. Will you please welcome Herb Hammond.
Thank you. It's nice to be here. Most importantly, it's nice to see these kinds of gatherings with as many people as there are here, sharing different views, different values, different facts, different perceptions of the world. Because if we stand across canyons from each other and hurl rocks at each other all day long, we don't get anywhere until the canyon's full of rocks, and that takes a long time. So I would like to just briefly, in 5 minutes here today, give you more than, or something different than just some of my ideas of technical kinds of solutions. I think you've heard a lot of good ones so far. And I think that's something that maybe we can help fit some of those technical ideas into. I'd like to address 3 words here in describing this to you. First of all, the first word is change. I think that one of the biggest things that I hear and see in society, and I feel myself, is that we're not just talking about changing a law here and there. We're not just talking about changing minor things, but we're talking about changing our ways of thinking. And I think that one of the most basic changes that has to come is something that I've learned, or at least had dusted off by the many Aboriginal people that I've had the privilege to work with over the last 10 or 12 years. And that's that we will never make good decisions, we will never find good solutions until we can connect our hearts to our brains. We have to start with our hearts. We have to start with those emotional arguments that we all feel, whether we're a logger, an environmentalist, a shopkeeper, a housekeeper. All of those, that it has to start there. And that's something we, time and time again, reject. And I would suggest to you that it's something that whatever you do, that you think about when you work on problems. I think part of change is also understanding that we relate to forests like we relate to each other. So, as Sam was inferring with some very good examples, that until we can change how we relate to each other socially, in communities, in societies, it shouldn't surprise us that we will continue to do similar kinds of things in our forests. So it is a whole problem. It's not something that you can separate. I think that it's not a problem for me to stand in front of you or in front of any group and say I do what I do because I love forests. But it took me a lot of time to be able to feel comfortable saying that. So welcome the kind of change in thinking that we need to solve these problems. The second word is commitment. Commitment is something that we have unknowingly either allowed to be taken away from us or we've given it away. Sometimes voluntarily, other times without even knowing it. What I'm also, a synonym for what I'm talking about is responsibility. We need to take back the responsibility that we have given away to institutions, to governments, to corporations, to employers. And that by taking back that responsibility, we can develop community solutions. I mean, every time I look out in a room of people, I know, without even knowing all of the people in that room, that there is the creativity, the balance, the special contributions that every one of you can make that kind of change happen. What you have to do is feel good about yourselves and to recognize that we each have something very special to offer to that kind of change. And we need to develop the kind of forums, the kind of institutions that are human, that are oriented towards human beings, and the kind of legislation and laws that facilitate us taking back that responsibility and working together to find those solutions. The third word is consensus. We have and continue to live in a society that operates on the basis of power over each other, control over each other. We need to learn how to share power, to have power with each other, control with each other. And then and only then are we going to solve forestry conflicts, social conflicts, etc. It's fun to participate in a consensual process, but it's something that's very new. It's also not something that's inefficient. Once you learn how to do it, the key basis for consensus is trust. But that's not something you get like that. It's something that you have to develop slowly, especially in a society like ours that has operated so long on the antithesis of consensus, which is basically competition. So, in just the few minutes that I have left here, I would give you a few ideas about what my views would be about how to put some of those concepts into practice. First of all, I would like to say that as a researcher, which I did for a number of years, and now as an activist involved in change and doing different things, I learned that anybody can take the same set of information, or any 2 or 3 people can say exactly the same set of information and come up with different facts. So I would suggest to you what we're looking for isn't so much the facts as it is the truth. The truth is something that people describe as an essential reality. So recognize that objectivity and impartiality are illusions. We all see the world through our own set of values. And that's the best way that we can solve these things is as a community getting together to try to develop consensus that's oriented towards the truth. Sure, put the facts on the table the way you see them, but then go through the process of actively hearing the other person's facts, the other person's values, to try to put those things together into a consensus that's oriented towards the truth. I think that the best place to do that isn't in Victoria, it's not in centralized governments, but it's in community governments. And I've played around with an idea that I call community forest boards that provides balanced representation within the community. It operates by consensus. It allocates forest uses to create this land use strategy. And I think it needs to operate certainly within the umbrella of 2 important principles that I would like to see enshrined in law. The first one is that any human use in a forest, be it logging or tourism, should be ecologically responsible. And what I mean by that is simply that any use has to function in a way that it protects the short and long-term integrity of the system. We have to have whole forests to have trees. We have to have whole forests to have jobs. And if we think that we don't, we should look at the Mediterranean, we should look at Asia, we should look at what's happening in Europe. The second part of that problem, or the second part of what I would see those boards doing, is ensuring balanced use. We don't have balanced use right now. We don't have balanced use when it comes to the Bernie Clovers and what he would like to do. He doesn't have any balance in that or any control over it, any more than there is any in terms of balance towards the kind of fully protected wilderness areas we need. So when I say balance, I mean a fair, equitable place for all forest users that's legally protected. So I would just close by saying again, I think the test is to remember that we need to have whole forests to have trees and whole forests to have jobs. Thanks.
Thanks, Herb. Bart is the Vice Chairman of IWA Sublocal Committee at Slocan Forest Products. He's also a Director of the Slocan Valley Watershed Alliance, and he has lived and worked in Slocan for the past 15 years. Please welcome Bart Scannell.
First of all, I'd like to thank Corky for inviting me to say a few things on this today. And I'd like to start off with the question, is there common ground on forestry issues? I'd like to offer my perspective as an IWA member on some aspects of these issues. One being timber harvesting in consumptive use watersheds. For me personally, I believe some common ground does exist to a certain degree already. As a union woodworker, as well as a rural water user, I recognize the need for a sustainable wood supply, along with a clean and reliable source of high-quality water. In fact, I have a vested interest in both. I don't believe the two are mutually exclusive. However, present policies and procedures for managing these often conflicting forest uses are inadequate. For example, guidelines for road construction and timber harvesting in community watersheds, which stipulate water as the priority resource, may allow those activities to proceed, even though the database indicates the area as high hazard classifications for sediment delivery potential, mass wasting, and soil erosion. As well, conventional industrial forest practices cannot meet the management priority objective of water protection in domestic use watersheds. Ecologically sound forest practices, alternative harvesting techniques, and a rational planning process, which includes meaningful public involvement, would, in my view, encourage compatibility of these and other divergent forest uses. I think it would be fair to say that growing public sentiment for protection of the environment has never been greater, particularly here in the West Kootenay, as well as elsewhere in the world. IWA Canada has responded to that sentiment with the adoption of a forest environment policy a little over a year ago. The policy is progressive and comprehensive and represents a very middle ground position, as well as being fully consistent with the recommendations of the United Nations Commission on the Environment and Development. In the policy, and I quote, IWA Canada commits itself to the establishment and maintenance of fully sustainable forestry, and for land use policies and systems dedicated to the conservation of valued life forms and the protection of the spiritual value of our forests. Job creation and protection of the environment are the foundations upon which our forest environment policy is built. Unfortunately, these vital objectives often conflict, and resolution of these conflicts is an increasingly difficult task. It requires careful judgment, comprehensive knowledge of the variety and vulnerabilities of the natural systems involved, and a willingness by more people to shoulder their share of the sacrifices required. These sacrifices should be equitably distributed throughout the community, not borne disproportionately by workers. IWA Canada commits itself to playing a full role in finding and implementing solutions to these grave problems, and to working with those willing to work with us in reasoned and fair processes in that crucial effort. The crisis in land use throughout the world flow from the growing demand for fertile land and the reluctance of each user to confront the ultimate fact of land scarcity. Pressures between industrial, commercial, recreational, and spiritual uses are ever increasing, while past land use decisions have reduced the amount and areas of land that are useful to commercial forests. Growing populations ensure that these pressures will continue to increase. Underlying all the tensions between different human uses is the fragility of the natural environment itself. We must determine which logging practices will do the least damage to ecosystems. We must determine what uses certain terrains can withstand while maintaining the integrity for future uses. We must also determine how waterways and watersheds can be protected for all their varied uses. These questions must be disentangled from the debate over conflicting human needs. The issue of tenure and land use has to be divided into its true components of environmental damage and human conflict. Once we do that, we can decide what the responsibilities of a tenure holder are and what we want to do with any one parcel of land. Tenure arrangements are the link between the public owner and the corporate users of the forests. It is through them that key policy decisions are made regarding land use. However, it should not matter if a tenure holder is a community or a multinational corporation. Regulations which protect the environment and employment must be established and enforced for all tenure arrangements." End quote. These are just a few highlights from our forest environment policy, which brings me to the second part of the question. How do we get there? Far too much valuable time and energy has already been wasted by people dividing themselves into opposing camps, by being cast in roles as adversaries, and by assuming defensive postures. It's time to end all of that and come together as a community. We need cooperation, not confrontation, and we need to build some trust and understanding. I believe the vehicle to do that is a community forest board, where all groups who have a stake in these forests can have a say within a framework of ecological democracy. Thank you.
Thank you, Bob. I didn't give the next speaker any warning that he was coming up, but it's Ralph Moore. To follow Ralph will be Brian Hamilton. Ralph Moore, a Creston resident, owns a sawmill and a skidder, plants trees during spring and early summer, attempting to manage a 150-acre woodlot, chairs the Forest and Watershed Committee and the Creston branch of East Kootenay Environmental Society. Please welcome Ralph Moore.
My working career spanned about 25 years, not counting the times I rode with my father in the logging trucks and such as a child and helped in Christmas tree cutting in the autumn. I worked in mills, ended up buying my own, worked logging, ended up buying a skidder. I've done juvenile spacing. In the last 5 years I've been tree planting, which has allowed me to spend about 3 months every spring in clear cuts. I have this 150-acre woodlot, which is privately owned land, which is a dilemma because my understanding of ecosystems is growing faster than my ability to change my management strategy. So at this point I'm almost doing nothing, just learning. I don't like to be defined by occupations though. I like to think I'm on a quest for beauty and knowledge and understanding. The 5 and the 15, I spent 5 years mining, by the way, and 15 years I figure in forest-related industry, and the 5 and the 15 don't add up to 25 because I think I've spent at least 5 years playing. I think that's very important. I have a dichotomy because I have made a living in the forest. I can see the forest as a resource to exploit, but also the forest is where I play, and it's the source of my spiritual inspiration. I can see boards and a cathedral at the same time. So I empathize with both sides, if there should be such a thing as both sides in this controversy. And it's a bitter controversy. And I have personal bitterness because the brutal, insensitive logging that we allow ourselves to conduct in our land is just unacceptable. I know dozens and dozens of mill workers, loggers, tree planters who are equally appalled by what they see, but because they feel they have to choose a side, often don't express their concerns. The debate over wilderness, I think, is a non-issue. A very simple, democratic, responsible way of dealing with this. We have to meet the expectations of all factions in society. And if we have to save 10 or 15 or 20% of the land, that's not unreasonable when you have 15 or 20 or 30% want it saved. It's the 80 or 85% that's available to the industry that we really have to look at. And how are we doing? I've worked around 25 years in the forests. And we got the lowest job ratio. That paper that was sitting on the seat indicates the same thing. With 1,000 cubic meters, we make one job in British Columbia. Everywhere else makes 2 or 3 or 4 times as many jobs with the same volume of wood. Something, though, that really shocked me. 25 years ago when I first started swinging an axe, you could attain a certain dollar value by manufacturing so many cubic meters of wood. If you compare that figure today, we've actually gone downhill by 8%. If you add inflation to the calculation, we're getting about half as much per cubic meter now as we were 25 years ago. I think that is where our dilemma arises. We are taking the highest quality wood left on earth and we're turning it into pulp and 2x4s. The rest of the world, working with a poorer quality wood, not nearly the resources we have, are making such higher value products that they have the employment. All we have is the degradation. You look at the income to the owner of the land, which is all of us. If you look at the stumpages of Idaho, Washington, Montana, and Alaska, and see what is left over after management costs as a profit, I hate to use the word profit, but I'll use that word, a profit to the people. Well, it averages around $10 a cubic meter in those states bordering our province, and in British Columbia it averages 2 cents a cubic meter. This is 1988. I say, wow, this is for the hospitals and the schools and everything, right? We hear about that all the time. Well, there's no money. Something's weird. Where do our jobs go? Well, I'd say it's mechanization, pure utilization, low-value products. An example, last fall in Hallmark Creek near Creston, a small business sale. Now, you're going to have to kind of not smirk about this. This small business sale had 4 men working in it. There was a faller buncher, a grapple skidder, a cat grapple skidder, and a wood processor. These 4 men turned out 15 loads a day. Now, I have a small skidder and I have a friend with a small cat. And we figure with a faller and a bucker, we can turn out a half a load per day per man. So if that small business sale had really been a small business sale with small business operators, there would have been 30 people working. We've, in effect, exported 26 jobs to Peoria, Illinois. And we're wondering where our jobs are. Right now, Crestbrook and Cranbrook, I read in the paper that they're going to do a retooling of the mill there that's going to cost $30 million and reduce the labor force by 30 people. Big industry is willing to spend $1 million to replace 1 of you people. This is ridiculous. $1 million a job is what it's costing us. The expansion of Castlegar, I know they're going to be competing with small mills for the best wood. They're not really going to go take the poorest quality stuff for pulp. I just know in my heart it's going to be the same as ever. And that expansion is going to mean Windelbach's and Hushcroft's and a dozen other little mills are going to go under because they're not going to be able to compete with the multinational. The damage to other resources. The flooding in November this year, all over the valley, all over the southern British Columbia, we had flooding. Well, I was working on getting a hydro dam going on the Goat River, an old dam, and I was right there in the water every day, and I watched the water come up. November 23rd and 24th, with the rain on snow incident, the Goat River went up by 2,200% in 2 days. It went into full flood, chocolate water, full trees going over the dam, and I just happened to carry a camera with me all the time. Trees, roots, branches, the whole thing going over this dam. The the bed of the river scoured. The bed moved. With the roar at that dam, you could hear the pinging like that of the boulders as they went down with the water and cracked on the bottom. Now, this scouring just happened to wipe out all the fish eggs as well. I mean, this goes on and on. I phoned the fisheries people and said, what's vulnerable right now? They said all the Dolly Varden and all the kokanee eggs are the most vulnerable to silt. They didn't mention what would happen if you threw them in the cement mixer, just churn them around. So we lost fish too. At that time, they were very concerned that they may have lost all the fish at the spawning channel at Meadow Creek. Same thing, too much silt. Arrow Creek has been a controversial thing in Creston. It's the domestic watershed. It's been an ongoing battle. It has not been logged. Arrow Creek ran crystal clear. There was no flooding, no debris flowing by. If it had been a spawning channel, there would have been no harm to the eggs. How many tourists are going to keep coming to see our country if now that we've gutted the back valleys, we come out onto the faces and do the same kind of thing? How many people live here for a lifestyle, for the quality of the living? Is that going to change when you can't drink the water and when the place is ugly? Well, it is. Now, this doesn't sound very much like middle ground yet, does it? I think we're wasting our energy fighting over the dregs. I think we can have our cake and eat it too, and I think our middle ground is going to have to be in going back to our best growing sites, which we've neglected, going back to them and treating them properly. The places we're fighting over now, realistically, we're talking about mining them. We take a crop off at 6,000 feet way to hell and go back into Purcells. We're not going to be coming back again, period. I mean, if it's 150 or 200 years when there's another forest there, we'll be lucky. The places we have to practice forestry are low elevation sites where we have soil, where we have moisture, where we have a climate, where we have a growing season that's more than a few weeks long. To do that, I think we have to change the whole tenure system. I believe we have to throw the multinationals completely out of the forest. I even have some doubts whether a manufacturer, whether he be local or anything, should have tenure in the forests. I believe, like I've heard this a number of times, we have to have some sort of community control, a resource board sort of thing where there's responsible local people that you can talk to and yell at and argue with and bump and grind, and someone who's accountable so if they screw up they can at least be turfed out in an election, and if someone's good they can be supported. One of the most important things this local control has got to emphasize is education, not just for the RPF, but the guy running the skidder. Like some of my friends, loggers, are the worst idiots I've ever seen in my life, and not because they're bad people. They haven't a clue. They don't know what they're doing. They couldn't make it through high school. They went out there and they started running a chainsaw and a skidder, and they don't know what they're doing. They haven't a clue. They know that they're getting wood from up there to down there, and they have no understanding of what else is involved. So we have to educate ourselves and the people who work in the industry. Tenure, I'd like to see as much variety as possible so that we can find out what works. I'd like to see the woodlot license kind of expanded into more like family tenure, where a piece of land is potentially able to be carried on in the family for forever and ever if they do it well. Forest Service should still manage some land, sell the wood, competitive bidding. And I think there's room for corporate management where companies are formed with the idea of managing forests, and let's see who can do it. And we have to identify our land base. It's back to inventory again. We don't know what we're working with. We have to inventory and decide what's capable of sustainable forestry, and then emphasize that. We have to space, plant, fertilize. We also have to be building trails and guiding and looking at all our options. And I'd like to end with a quote too, but I'm going to quote H.R. Macmillan, of all people. At the Sloan Royal Commission of 1955-1956, H.R. Macmillan warned British Columbians that unless the province's forest policy was altered, the people of BC would have their birthright stolen, their standard of living reduced, their taxes increased, and the forests that are the foundation of their present and future wealth destroyed.
Our next speaker is Brian Hamilton. Brian is a resident of the Kootenai West Park Slocan Valley chapter, owner operator of a small tower logging operation in the Slocan Valley. Please welcome Brian Hamilton.
If I sound nervous up here, it's because I am very nervous. I'm not used to talking to large groups of people. I've lived in Slocan Valley for the past 18 years, and 14 of those years I've been in the logging industry. I quit school in grade 10 because I didn't think school had anything to offer for me anymore, and went to work in the logging industry. I don't think, like the speaker before me said, that people need an education to do the job right. I think that anybody can do the job right if they just go about it in the right way and the right guidance at it. Nobody wants to see, any loggers I work with or that I know want to see the last tree cut down and the ground all dug up, because we have kids and we want our kids to work in the forest industry. Just as a lot of you people want your kids to carry on in your footsteps. I think that I've, like I say, logged for the past 14 years in the Slocan Valley, and in that time I've seen a big change. In the last 10 years specifically, we've used to, in the springtime when the snow started to melt and thaw, if you were running a skidder, you skidded on the trail until the skidder wouldn't go anymore. The mud was so deep. Well, public opposition and a few interest groups like the Slocan Valley Watershed Alliance, the Valhalla Society have made companies more responsible. Now, the first sign of mud running on a trail in the spring, the Forest Service has asked you to shut down, at least until it freezes up, because sometimes our weather gets warm and for 2 weeks and then it'll get cold again. We don't go through those big mud holes. Also, the soil degradation, it's gone from, you could take a D8 in the bush, which is a very large cat, and make your skid trails. Now we're down to the point of a 2-foot cut in the hillside. You cannot do that with a D8 or a D6 or sometimes even a 550. It's got to be a smaller cat. I think that these groups, what they've done is they started the ball rolling towards some middle ground, because before it was all industry, and industry did what they liked and nobody could say anything to them. They've got the ball rolling and are making the industry more responsible, which kind of comes down to the loggers who are caught in the middle. The older loggers that refuse to change, a lot of them aren't in business anymore because they can't cut with their old practices. Either that or they were fined heavily and you just can't operate it. It's a pretty tight line as it is. Like I say, I started logging that way, and 5 years ago I decided there was going to be change come to the forest industry, especially in our industry in our area, and that's why I started yarder logging, which is tower logging. Specifically because it doesn't chew up the soil. Sure, you have to clear cut, but not in all instances. You can selective log with it as well. But if we want our forests to look like a well-managed backyard, you have to take interest in what's there and use the right kind of machinery. I'm not trying to defend all loggers, because there's still some that will do a bad job. On the fact of middle ground, like I say, I think we're working towards some middle ground, but it's not here yet. In the past month, and mainly due to the Parks 90 plan, a lot of people in the community have got up in arms with what's happening in our area with parks and what's proposed. These are people that normally wouldn't say anything and don't get up and voice their opinion, and wouldn't side with a group of people for one reason or another, even if they were looking out for some of their best interests. I won't stand here and defend shear groups in front of you, but I think that it is an avenue for a lot of people that wouldn't side with the right or wouldn't side with the left or whatever it might be, in the middle, that do want to say something. Whether their idea is right or wrong, they want to say something. I think that on behalf of the shared groups, in our areas, what we want to see is the Parks 90 plan completely scrapped in the form that it's come to us. We don't think that going into small communities with information placards and not a chance to speak what you want to say and what you think people should hear. You just look at these pictures. There was 2 meetings, one in Revelstoke and one in Nelson here, that you could make public opposition. I think what we'd like to see is what I say is that scrapped and then come back to the people in our communities that are going to be affected by it and ask us exactly what we want and how big areas we want and what we need. I grew up living, like I say, 18 years in the Slocan Valley, and that's right in Slocan. The Valhalla Park is my backyard, and I spent a lot of time there in the winter time, summertime, hiking and fishing. There's areas there, wilderness reserve areas, that would have protected themselves. You know, I'm glad to see a park there because it is a beautiful place. But that's one. I think that they should come to every community and ask us if the next area they propose is what we want. I read that somewhere the Parks 90, their ultimate goal was to have all BC's parks in place by the year 2000. Well, that doesn't give our kids a chance to even decide what they want. I forgot most of what I was going to say because, like I say, I am pretty nervous. Anyways, I have to agree with a lot of what's been said here today by different speakers, and I have read a lot lately from the Slocan Valley Watershed Alliance on a community forest board idea. And when you find with the objectives of a share society, what we're talking about and what they've been talking about is a lot the same. But the trouble is there's 2 groups of people again. So maybe if them 2 groups can get in places like this where they can talk about it and bring their ideas out without getting something crammed down your throat by one side or the other, then I think we will have some middle ground.
Fred has a Bachelor of Science in Electrical Engineering, University of California, Berkeley, 1967. 3 years as a research assistant, Geophysics Department, University of Alberta in Edmonton. Came to Nelson in 1970. Instructor in physics, Notre Dame University. Owner and operator of Driftwood Bookstore for several years. Presently employed at there is some more on the back. Employed by KFP Sawmill from 1960. Employed at STEP Sawmill at a federal program working with employment disadvantaged young people. Please welcome Fred Hockey.
Over the years, I have seen the deterioration of the image of the people working in the forest industry. Some of this is justified and some of it is not, and some of the reasons have been discussed by previous speakers. The net result of the confusion over who's responsible for what and what is the impact of having or not having a particular forest industry in a particular area has created the difficulties in finding the middle ground. I'd like to present some specific paradoxes to illustrate this that I have seen in my own involvement in the forest industry. These paradoxes are neither good nor evil, they just are part of the issue. In 1979, when I was employed at KFP and an active member of the plant committee, I was aware that the mill was running out of logs. Management approached me because they were aware of the fact that the particular property that myself and my family lived on at the end of Sproul Creek basically blocked access to the Crown land. So we were approached, and the position was fairly simple. You know, we need to get across your property. Your job is on the line. And there was also a $20,000 cash offer. The sort of thing that tries your conscience. However, at that particular time, we were aware of the fact, first of all, they couldn't guarantee, who would be doing the particular logging in the particular area. And also who would take responsibility for the problems that I would not only inflict upon myself, but on my friends and neighbors. We turned the offer down. Later on, that small section of property was expropriated and they got the access to the Crown land anyway. Now, later on, when I became active with our watershed committee, I continually heard the remark, this is like the fox guarding the chickens, directed toward me. There being an assumption that if you're involved with logging in the forest industry, you don't really care what happens in the watershed. And this, of course, is not true. I can remember someone at a watershed meeting one time stating during the meeting there was absolutely not going to be any logging, no way. After the meeting, this person came up to me and they were looking for a specific type of lumber, which I happen to have at our mill. And I said, yes, that lumber is for sale, and I stated the price. And very upset about the high price, not making the connection that as you log more environmentally sound, logs become more expensive, the price of the lumber goes up. Another person who had taken a similar position, no logging, no way, asked me after the meeting if I knew someone who could log private land. They were going to log their property. And of course the next question was, and how much do I get for my logs? I find these kinds of conflicting, as I said, they're neither good nor evil, but we all hold them. We hold those kinds of conflicting views. The Step Sawmill has had 2 timber sales, and I must confess that I have never been involved with that end of the business, setting up timber sales, working with the Forest Service. And it was a real eye-opener. The Forest Service prescribes the method in which you're going to cut a particular block. If you want the wood, which we did, then you will follow the contract and you will cut it in that prescribed manner. For both these timber sales, it was a clear cut with seed trees to remain, was the prescribed method. In both cases, we would not have wanted to do that. If it had been our choice and we were able to establish the particular cut method, that is not what our choice would have been, both economically and environmentally, for both those reasons. Secondly, we ran into some really interesting things regarding the issue of firewood after a timber sale has been cut. When the logging was finished on the one particular sale, we had approximately 60 cords of trees that had been standing dead, decked on the landing, to be burned by the Forest Service. We approached the Forest Service and we said, look, this is crazy. First of all, it's firewood and people are gathering firewood and this is readily accessible. It's been pulled out of the bush, it's on the landings. They need to only bring up their trucks and they can cut it and they're on their way. No, this was not possible. What we had to do, if we were going to do that, was first of all hire a certified scaler at approximately $15 an hour to collect the $1.50, which would be approximately what the stumpage would be on a pickup load of firewood. And we also had to have one piece of equipment, a cat or a skidder, and that's worth $40 an hour up there on the site. Presumably this was to prevent fires. However, a quarter of a mile down the road was the free firewood permit use area. Nobody was supervising that and there was no piece of equipment there. Therefore, with those problems, we decided that we couldn't let people up on the timber sale. And as a consequence, the 60 cords of quite usable firewood was burnt up by the Forest Service. Our mill attempted to give for free, including the loading was free, slabs and cedar blocks, which would be just the ends from the logs, to the Parks branch for the campfires. This would have been through one of their contracts. We were told that this was unacceptable. The reason being, the tourists didn't like the cedar. They preferred something like nice fir. I don't know if any of you have ever camped in the States, particularly, well, I'm most familiar with Idaho and Washington. Then you would be familiar with that pickup truck that arrives around 5 or 6 o'clock at night and sells you a little bundle of stuff like that for $4. We don't do that. We prescribe fur and we give it to them. These are just a few of the paradoxes that exist and in our industry and also contribute to the problems of trying to find a middle ground. On the positive side, sawmills have become more efficient in terms of the lumber recovered from the logs that they are able to use. In STEP's very modest operation, and I emphasize modest, we have increased lumber recovery by marketing lumber of odd dimensions, which would not have been acceptable before, such as 3x4s, 4x5s, also a half-inch decorative board material that we also produce. This is something that's been practiced in Sweden for a long time, and that increases the amount of actual usable wood, lumber, that you get out of a stick out of a log. We also produce 3x3 fence posts, and this allowed us to recover wood from the small tops of the cedar trees. The middle ground requires that we must use efficiently the wood that is available, to us. I believe that it is possible. It must be possible to have multiple use of the land. Several points, some of them have been made before, so I'm not going to elaborate on them. There must be a mutually agreeable logging standards, taking into account viewscapes and impact on watersheds. Logging of private land must also have certain standards. 3 of the last 4 specific logging conflicts that I have at least been consulted about have dealt with the logging of private land. There must be a consensus model put into place where conflicts can be resolved, where all parties involved can be heard. Also, we've heard inventory mentioned several times. In fact, we saw several slides showing various types of inventory. The problem becomes that these inventories must reflect also accessible wood. And this has always been an issue with those of us that use it. It's very nice when you talk to somebody, or you read a forestry report, or you talk to somebody from forestry and they say you've got X number of cubic meters of wood available. If it's above or behind a rock wall, it's not available. If it's up the side of a mountain, it's not available. And too often, this is what's included in the inventory, it would appear that we have an incredible amount of wood that we have accessible. Looking at the red area on the one slide, which was accessible, it just dawned on me, see, there's a mountain range in through there. There's a couple over here. So in fact, it must reflect what is actually economically accessible. Finally, I am encouraged by attending this meeting where there have been so many different views put forward and positions. I think it will be, and as I said before, it must be possible to find some sort of middle ground. Thank you.
Thank you, Fred. Following speaker will be Klaus Offerman, and our next speaker is Richard Allen. Richard has lived in the Slocan Valley community of hills for 20 years. He is a past member and chair of the Regional District Advisory Planning Commission for Area H. He has been director and president of the Hills Recreation Society, and he is currently a director and co-chair of the Slocan Valley Watershed Alliance. For the past 10 years, he has worked for Selkirk College as an instructor in its adult basic education program in the Cusp. Please welcome Richard Allen.
Thank you. It's nice to be here today with so many other people sharing their views. I guess I could add a little bit more to my little introduction to say that I have worked a bit in the forest industry as well. I was a tree planter for about 5 years, and I built log houses for a while also. So when Corky first called me about this afternoon's presentation, he asked me if to participate in addressing the topic, is there middle ground, and can we get there in 5 minutes? So I told Corky, I realize there's some urgency to the situation. But and he explained to me that really what he meant was that I'd have 5 minutes to talk about the situation. And that's still a pretty tall order, but anyway, here goes. What I see in our communities right now is a sense of desperation and frustration and a lack of effective mechanisms for change on all sides of the forest management issue. And this has led to polarization in our communities. We have loggers characterizing conservation-minded people as preservationists who want the forest untouched and who won't be happy until there's no logging at all happening in BC. On the other hand, members of the newly established share groups, who are largely workers in the logging and mining industries, have been accused in recent letters to the editor of being associated with Central American right-wing death squads. This type of exaggerated rhetoric, I think, serves to increase the hostility and polarization around the forest management issue. And it also serves to allow one side to shrug off what the other side is saying. Because they're ill-informed, they really don't know what they're talking about. In other words, by shooting the messenger, we don't have to listen to the message. And both sides have a message, it seems to me. Or the many sides, as has been pointed out. There are more than two sides in this issue, I think. Conservationists see inadequate protection of and provision for the range of forest uses and values that extend beyond timber extraction. Things like clean water, healthy fish and wildlife populations, and the survival of the forest ecosystem as a seamless web of relationships between countless species that has evolved over millions of years and about which we understand really very little. The logging community, on the other hand, sees a threat to the timber land base and all this concern for other forest values. As the share groups state in their objectives, we must make the best use of the environment without compromising the economy. Conservationists would turn this idea around. We must make the best use of our economy without compromising our environment. And therein, I think, lies the heart of the controversy and the challenge. How can we have economic well-being in our communities and at the same time accommodate the wide range of needs and values that the forest provides beyond timber? And how can we do both without fragmenting the forest to the point where it's no longer a forest? Can we have our cake and eat it too, as one of the earlier speakers suggested? And here also lies the middle or common ground, a dissatisfaction with the status quo, a desire for the protection of eroding quality of life, both in economic and environmental terms, and a lack of effective mechanisms to turn the tide, regardless of which way you might think the tide should be turned. We all share a desire to live, work, and play in a clean and healthy environment, and we want to keep the whole show going for our kids and their kids as well. So how do we get there? We have to get control of the situation, I feel. Government policies have been steadily relinquishing control over and responsibility for the forests of our province to multinational corporations whose allegiances are to shareholders who usually live a long way from here. The logging community feels an economic squeeze because, in fact, there have been a declining number of jobs provided by an industry that has been cutting ever-increasing numbers of trees. Let's take the Celgar expansion proposal as an example. The expanded mill will process twice the volume of wood as the existing mill. According to the company projections, there may be 40 new jobs over the present level of 400 jobs in the mill. There will be no new bush jobs if the company's claims are true that all the wood needed is already being cut. Sure, there will be increased revenues from the doubling of production, but little of these profits will end up in the pockets of local residents. So Castlegar gets a building boom for a few years, and hopefully cleaner air and water. But the price we paid to get this company to come into line with existing pollution control laws that they've been allowed to violate for years is a doubling of the allocation of our forests to this mill with virtually no increase in long-term jobs. And we don't even know for sure if the wood is there to support this expansion in the long term, because that question wasn't allowed to be addressed during the expansion review process. It seems clear to me that the community of Castlegar, the region's forests, and the province was held up for ransom in this situation. Multiply this across the province and across Canada, and you have a current picture of forest management in BC and the country. No wonder workers are concerned for their futures, and conservationists are concerned over the survival of the forest land base to meet other needs and values. So what do we need? I think we need to regain control at the provincial level, and we need to regain control at the community level. Provincially, we need policies that regain control of our economy and our forest land base. We need policies that tie rights to the resource to the responsibility to provide jobs and economic stability in our communities. We need to do more with the trees that we harvest. We can't increase the annual allowable cut any further. It already exceeds the sustainable levels set by the Ministry of Forests and far exceeds more conservative levels calculated by other groups. At the local level, we need public involvement in real decision-making, which gives communities the responsibility for the long-term health and productivity of the forest land base, and the rights to employment and the more intangible values associated with the quality of life that we all enjoy. We also need to give our communities the psychological well-being that comes with the feeling that you're part of the solution rather than part of the problem. And finally, as a starting point in this process, I think we as individuals need to be open and respectful and considerate of the full range of views and concerns that exist in our communities. And we need to devise ways that we can come together to discuss and find solutions for our common problems. Today seems to be a good stab at that. Thank you.
Thanks, Richard. Our final speaker for today is Klaus Offerman. Klaus is an ex-employee of Kootenay Forest Products plywood plant. Currently, he is the first Vice President and Business Agent for IWA Canada's Kootenay Local. He is a member of the IWA's National Forest Environment Committee. Please welcome Klaus Offerman.
Thank you, Madam Chair. The IWA Canada is convinced that we must and we will identify middle ground because the social and economic well-being of us all is rooted as deeply in our forest land as are the trees. But we understand that as a result of government's historic failure to provide full employment, to settle land claims, to properly regulate the forest industry, and to manage all of the values of our forest land in a sustainable fashion, we now face a forest land crisis. Later, I will talk about some aspects of IWA policy which we hope will be considered middle ground. But first, I want to talk about our position that we do have a responsibility to produce timber here in BC. You and I, we all stress the environment. We don't like to think about it too often, but we know that in order to live, all of us have to consume other life forms, animal and or plant. So for each of us, there is some part of the world devoted to growing potatoes or wheat or coffee or sugar or oranges or to raising beef and poultry, etc., all for our consumption. So some other part of the world, perhaps El Salvador, that might otherwise grow tropical forests, is now devoted to growing cotton for the shirts and blouses that you and I wear. And some part of the world that might otherwise grow old-growth trees is now devoted to growing trees for the lumber and paper that we all use. Zero ecological impact is not an option for anybody. The land that you and I depend upon for the physical goods that we consume may be out of sight and therefore out of mind, but it is out there somewhere. It is therefore an important premise of IWA Canada policy that in order to avoid inflicting the environmental stress of our own lives upon other parts of the world, we should produce at least the equivalent of what we consume. In other words, if we adopt an attitude that all timber harvesting is inherently bad and stop logging for that reason, all while we continue to use toilet paper, sit on mahogany seats, buy furniture, build homes, eat bread, drink coffee, where cotton, we will export environmental stresses of our own lives to other parts of the world, perhaps to people who have fewer choices than we do, and to ecologies which are more fragile than our own. If we do have an obligation to produce goods from this land, then it makes economic and environmental sense to produce them from a renewable resource that is best suited to our ecology. And here in BC and in the Kootenays, that means maintaining productive commercial forests where we can best harvest and plant and tend on a sustainable basis trees for needed paper and building materials. In that context, woodworkers feel that harvesting timber and sawing lumber are necessary and are honorable ways of earning a living. A change in contrary attitudes will encourage woodworkers to participate in the search for middle ground. And that brings me to some of our policies which we hope do represent middle ground. We think there is an urgent need for a comprehensive forest inventory in BC. Next, we must end decision-making by ad hocery and formulate a rational land use planning process for all of BC. And when we disagree about the use or non-use of a certain valley or hillside, we all need access to a fair conflict resolution mechanism. We must not remove any commercial land from production without worker input or without first ensuring compensation and retraining for workers. We need a proactive commitment to the maintenance and creation of decent livelihoods, and we ought to link access to timber tenures with jobs, community stability, and secondary manufacturing. Today, 30% of BC's softwood lumber exports have various degrees of value added to them in distant corners of the world. We should bring those jobs home and add value to the lumber and the pulp and the trees. Right here in the Kootenays. We agree that silvicultural policies must have as their ultimate goal the regeneration of high-quality, genetically diverse forests. We say ecosystems should determine the method of harvesting utilized. We agree that there is a place for selective logging. And we say ecosystems, not profit, should determine the appropriate forest rotation age. Domestic water must not be adversely affected by forestry activities. We stand opposed to chemical lumber treatment. We agree our waterways must not be tainted with forestry-related chemicals, and workers need to be provided with whistleblower protection so that they can report any despoiling of the environment without fear. And finally, we feel that workers and community groups ought to be empowered in resource use planning, and to that end, we support the formation of community forest committees, perhaps with a different mandate than Herb envisions. In conclusion, I believe that here in the Kootenays, it is our common ground that we love this land. We want to live here and make a living here. So woodworkers recognize the need to restock the forest land. We need to restore our ecological capital, and together we need to figure out the how of using our forest while at the same time sustaining it. Woodworkers are convinced if we do all of that, the rent alone from our forest land will provide fresh water, tall trees, honorable goods for the world, decent livelihoods, lush green wild places where we and those that follow us can go to refresh our spirits. Thank you.
He's been just itching to get up here, so I guess we'll just let him get at it. Can we have a warm hand for our next MLA, Borky Evans?
At NDP conventions, when they don't know what to do, they do a thing called testing the house. And I think you've been sitting here for a whole long time,
And so I'd like to test the House on how many of you would like to go to have supper and skip the next part. Those in favor of ending here? No? Yes?
Nice and tight. Nice and dry.
Okay, we're going to settle for quick. Is that the deal? Okay. Quick has never been my best trick. Yeah, that would be fair, wouldn't it? I wanted to talk a little bit about some of the things that I didn't get to talk about. First off, I thought the question to Brian about his position on clear cuts was unfair. I don't believe, and you can correct me if I'm wrong, I don't think there was a single person sitting against this wall with a position unilaterally on clear cuts, is there? No. Any speakers? I don't have a position unilaterally on clear cuts. Bernie and I selected a small piece of land and then went and clear cut it this winter because we believed, and the Windlaw Watershed Committee came and looked at it and seemed to agree that that was the right thing to have happen. I don't think anybody can have a position on clear cuts. Everybody's position is you go and you do the most appropriate thing on each individual piece of land. And Herb's comment that we ought to reverse the percentage is probably quite accurate. But it would be a terrible thing if we took away one of the tools of foresters just because we wanted the pendulum to swing the other way for a while. On the subject of Parks 90, I don't think Parks 90 had the slightest thing to do with making any parks. I don't think there'll be any parks on the government's agenda when they run for office. The whole thing was a sham in order to make people fight so they could go to an election and tear apart the consensus that was building a rural BC. We're going to deal with we are committed to making 12% of the land wilderness. I'm going to back that up. I think it should be right up front. You don't have to agree with that to vote for us. It is our party's position. It is what Brundtland is saying to the world. We're saying we're the richest people in the world. We ought to lead the way. And the issue is, what do we do with the other 88%? That's the issue that I'm committed to, and that's what I was hoping we would talk about here. On the subject of whether we should license loggers, you're damn right we should license loggers. I should have to have a license and you can lift it. Provided that, by giving me a license, you guarantee me a job. I was going to talk about that in my prepared speech, but it seems like you already agree with me, so maybe I don't have to say that. I want to talk about sports users at the table. You're right. Other people who were not invited was somebody to represent the tourism industry, a tree planter, a person, Brenda Herbison, who was going to be on the panel from the point of view of wildlife expert, was unable to come. Lots of people aren't here. But the fact that somebody isn't here doesn't mean that they should be denied access in the future. It would be nonsense to think that if you're Herb Hammond and you get a name as an environmentalist, or if you're Corky Evans and you get a name as a logger, you get to sit on the panel. That's not what we're talking about. We're talking about trying to change all that and find a way that everybody gets to be in the act. And I apologize for the fact that you feel unrepresented, and I think there's probably others of you who feel that your point of view is unrepresented. We did the best we could. I feel like the main reason you don't need to hear from me is because you just heard from 20 of the people that I think are the cream of the crop. I feel like we have it together as a political party because we could get these people to come here. And I would hope that you would feel like this kind of consensus building is the kind of government you might expect, and it can only get bigger. And that doesn't mean not making mistakes. I have made lots of them, and I think everybody would admit I tend to make them in public. It's not like that. It's like we keep on trying. And I would challenge the Liberals and Social Credit and the Greens to have an event like this, to attempt from your membership or the people you know or the people that you've worked with, attempt to find this many points of view, attempt to let those political parties attempt to show that they can encompass, that they care about this many different points of view. Now, the things I intended to say. As a politician, as a logger, I've met most all these people. Dick Brenton stopped me from being a jerk almost, I guess, 15 years ago, and
Make it 25.
25. I mean, from fallen trees in a creek. That was what I was into in those days. as a politician, I meet a whole different bunch of people. I went and I stood one day in the Arrow Creek in Creston. Now, I'm picking Arrow Creek because it's the most contentious drainage I know of in the Kootenays. It's got an orchard industry at the bottom of it making millions of dollars or losing millions of dollars out of the water that comes out of the drainage, and a brewery making millions of dollars, and a government making millions of dollars of tax off the brewery, and an entire town drinking that water. And it's, of course, licensed. And it's licensed to a mill which has laid off a shift and said they need the wood. I mean, this is a contentious issue. The town that drinks out of Arrow Creek has had its former largest employer, Crestbrook, walk in. I was at the meeting, sat down at the meeting, looked across the table at the mayor and said, we're closing the mill because we can't get enough wood and there's nothing you can do about it. And the mayor and council said, can we go to Victoria and argue for more wood? We'll give you No, they didn't say, and I don't want to say on television that they said, we'll give you our watershed, but it was certainly in the ambiance in the room, what do we have to give? And Crestbrook said, no, we're out of here. So the Arrow Creek watershed matters to a lot of people. I went there and I walked around for a day with the orchardists in the irrigation district who run that area. And we were way up at the top and we were looking down. I think, as Ralph said, it's a unroaded drainage, and you can get right to the top because, let me tell you, the drainage behind it is not unroaded. And you can see for like 6 miles the virgin timber, young in the main timber, with the water running through it. And I wanted to say to the people that spent their day with me, okay, look, this thing's worth millions and millions of dollars, and we ought to protect it, and elect me, and I'll go away and I'll slap some kind of a permanent moratorium on this drainage, and it'll be protected, and your orchards will be saved, and your brewery will be saved. And I wanted to say that because it made economic sense, and it sure made political sense. There's a lot more people drinking that water than there is logging in Creston. And I wanted to say it because I like the people who had just spent their whole day trying to educate me, but I wasn't able to say it. And the gist of what I want to say to you is I wasn't able to say it because the next day I had to go to Caslow. And I had to talk to those people about their watershed, and I have to go to Perry's Ridge and talk to those people about their watershed. And I have to go to Silverton and talk to those people about their watershed. And I have to go, in order to get IWA to come to this meeting, I had to go and leaflet the woods workers at Slocan Forest Products. I have to go as a candidate to all these people. And I can't stand in front of somebody that I like and say, okay, let's cut a deal with your piece of land, because it would be a lie. It is the way that politicians have always behaved, all those kinds of deals. I'll tell you whatever you want to know today and go tell somebody else tomorrow, but it's a lie. We can't start walking around and saying, okay, vote for me and I'll make this into a park, and vote for me and I'll guarantee your job over there. That kind of jerk behavior in terms of land is what got us to this place that we're in. The best that we can say to people is that we will make decisions attempting to make consensus decisions, attempting to make decisions in the community. We'll make decisions as best we can on a site-specific basis. And the politician who makes you promises that are any different than that, I think, is a liar. The notion of middle ground, in order to define the middle ground, which is as wide as all these people, it's necessary to define the bookends, the places that are out there that are not middle ground. And you all know what they are, and I don't want to talk about them because they are my friends. The people who say save it all and the people who say tip it all over are people that I know and have worked with and are my friends and are my neighbors. We have New Democrats in both of those pots. The reason that people say those things, that lock it all up or tip it all over, is because they're afraid. Because we are going around behaving like we're just about 5 acres from the end of the road. And for those of us who make our living that way, we say, well, if we're only 5 acres from the end of the road, then by God, let's have it so I can make my payments. I pay off this machine or I pay off my house, and then at least I can get out even and I don't have to leave. And the environmentalists are saying, well, if we're only 5 acres from the end of the road, then by God, I want mine. I want the part that I care about, or I'm going to give to my kids, or I want the part that I drink out of. The notion that this is a sunset industry is the problem, and it has defined the haywire positions on the opposite end of the debate. And the first person to call the forest industry a sunshine industry was Bill Bennett Jr. And he did it. The last premier of British Columbia, the one that even looks good now, he did it in order to justify giving money to a tourism industry in the East Kootenay. He said, look, the forest industry in the East Kootenay is on the way out, and so we're going to dump this money into this project in order to diversify, because the forest industry is a sunset industry and we can't look that way anymore. Once we started walking down that road, I think we made people afraid. And when people are afraid, or let me personalize this and say when I am afraid, I tend to be haywire and to act with despair. And once we do that, we make really lousy decisions. And on the one hand, we got people saying, we got to save the last 5 acres, and those of you who don't agree with me are ignorant, and you don't know the right words, and you don't know the right facts. And on the other side, we got people saying, we got to go log the last 5 acres, and those of you who don't agree with me are lazy. And the reason why we got people calling other people names is because when you're afraid, what do? You look for somebody to blame. You're in a jam, and you look for the group that you're going to dump on. Imagine if we looked at the penny upside down. God, I have no idea where we are here. Imagine if it was not a sunset industry. Imagine if we were talking about there's a lot of wood left. What we have just done is what they said 10 years ago. We have come to the point of the fall down effect. The big trees are gone. And the wood over the mountain that we could go log and forget about it, and Corky, you can go devastate the place and bring the money back down to the valley bottom, so long as we don't have to see it. That age is over, but the industry is not over. What we have left is the finest timber, I think, in the world. We have these 100-year-old stands with 7 different commercial species and a half a different dozen non-commercial species, and Herb taught me at Suffolk College that there's also a great many plants and animals that have no commercial value, and I don't even know the names of out there. That wonderful, healthy diversity is left. We're not at the end of anything except of the time where we could behave like we were ignorant. The people who are telling us that we got to fight over what's left are doing so for exactly the same reason they sent us Parks 90. Because whether they're a multinational corporation, a transnational, which, as you know, in the last 10 years we've given them all the forests. I mean, not only in British Columbia, but worldwide. 90% of all the forest products in the world are sold by 6 corporations. They got lots and lots of different names, but the board of directors and the stockholders are 6 people, 6 groups. Those people don't want you to get it together, to have hope, and take collective action because it's in their interest to control your resources. And the people who are the government in British Columbia don't want you to have hope and to take collective action because they will stay in power as long as they can make you fight. And there's another group. Everybody loves to badmouth the people in government and the people in the city, but there's another group of really nice people who include my daughters and my son. And that is the people who now live in the cities, who don't want you to get it together because they're dependent upon making a living off of your land. In British Columbia, of course, you probably know that the map is a big giant rectangle, and all the people live in the bottom left-hand corner. And as a result of that fact, 2/3 of the MLAs now all live in the bottom left-hand corner, and they represent people who don't know if they're punched or bored on any of the issues that we're discussing here today. And those people are running their civilization, their culture, off of your water. They need Brian to get up tomorrow. Brian has to get up tomorrow and go log because they're going to run BC off of the money that they get off of these industries. If we get it together and have hope and take collective action, and we say, look, you guys are going to make some different decisions. We're not going to knock it all down on somebody else's agenda. All 3 of those groups have something to lose. I believe that all of the citizens of BC, including those in the city, also have something to gain, but they don't know it yet. And we are not talking to them because we're busy yelling at each other and letting admin and corporations and politicians some politicians, speak for us. As a result of our fear, we haven't done lots of the things that people here say we ought to do, and I'm not going to give you the list. You got it already. Inventory. That's like counting up your assets. If we were going to business tomorrow to manage forests, you start by the inventory. I don't need to tell you why we need to do that. But one of the assets that we have ignored is woods workers, I think. My wife employs 60 people in human services, and almost every single one of them has a ticket of one sort or another, and in exchange for having a ticket, they get more money. And even those that don't have a ticket have the option of going to upgrading courses. If you're a secretary, you can take upgrading courses and learn to run a computer. When my cat breaks down, Bernie's cat breaks down, we'll pick up the phone and phone a welder, but you can't advertise in the phone book to be a welder unless you've got a ticket. And you people help to pay the cost of welders getting a ticket. When I phoned Brian to ask him to come and talk here, he wasn't home because he was off getting a first aid ticket. We, even us loggers, have to get a ticket to talk about the health of each other. But I can climb on my cat and have, for 15 years, knowing nothing, and drive it through your watershed without any ticket and without any knowledge. It's way worse than that. You have heard from a half a dozen loggers today, and I swear to you, they represent hundreds who want to do it right. But there's no place for those people to go to learn, and that's not a mistake. The resource industry, the forest industry, perhaps also the farming industry, those industries that the world wants to extract resources from in the least refined fashion, they don't want the workers to have the option of becoming as intelligent as the managers. I went with Chris Choquette to a conference at Selkirk College, and it was billed as a soils workshop, and a guy from Victoria was coming, and Chris went and I went, and we sat all evening, and a guy showed slides of devastated forest land, and at the end we said to him, okay, well, what do you want us to do? Like, tell us how to do it differently. And the guy said, that's not my job. My job is to go around and count up the losses, or take pictures of the losses, and make $50,000 or $80,000 writing studies about the losses. But it's not his job to talk to cat operators and tell them how to do it any differently. I think it's on purpose. I would argue that if we wanted to treat our assets as important things, one of the things we would treat as important is the people who work in this business and who would like to do it right. And we would move heaven and earth to take the education industry and open it up. We're all unemployed 3, 4, sometimes 6 months of the year. There's plenty of months that we would be able to go and avail ourselves of the knowledge that others of you have, should the powers that be, and I hope we do, decide that we have a value someday. And maybe if we understood the words, we wouldn't be so afraid of the conversation. Maybe if we were in on the joke, and maybe if we were all sitting at the same table, people would use words that communicated with other people instead of words that are actually meant to show how smart we are. I think the sky's the limit on how much better it could get if all the players were welcome at the table. And then after we counted up our assets and took care of some of them, I think we'd have to talk about control. You've heard enough about quota today, I won't belabor the point. But I want to just say that we're at the ideological nth degree. Like, capitalism in BC, sort of cowboy capitalism. I'm not going to mention the name of the premier, but the Fraser Institute notion of wide open worldwide capital can come here and buy anything they want and do anything they want. That kind of deregulated cowboy capitalism is so far out there on the end of the teeter-totter that to me it's sort of like it's like Stalinism. It's just as out of control as the communist world was for many, many years. In the United Nations, when they look at commodities, they call wood products an agricultural product. It's the same as rice and wheat, only it takes longer to grow. It comes out of the land, and when you want to talk about management, you got to talk about control. Who controls the land? After the Japanese and then the French and then the Americans got through trash in Vietnam, Vietnam got together. Vietnam got together under a fairly strict communist government, and that communist government said, okay, there won't be any private land, and there won't be land under private management, and there won't be community land. There will be state-controlled communes, or communally owned land. And the quotas of what rice you produce and the market for your rice will be determined by the state. And the net result was that by 1989, this country, as rich as any country in the world, had to import food, had to borrow money to import food, making the payments, the outrageous payments on the money that they borrowed had 400% inflation. They had to do something, so they decided, well, let's see what would happen if we put the people back into some tenure over the land. And they didn't privatize it, they leased it back to the people who used to work on it, either as communities or as individuals. And then they put people's heart back into the land, like what all these people have been saying about managing forest land. I care about it. And they let those people then take their product out and market it to a whole lot of people. Like now the state wasn't going to control the market, so everybody could go bid on rice. And then by 1991, Vietnam had turned it upside down. They're now a net exporter of rice, and inflation is at 18%. I don't want to hold up either British Columbia or Vietnam as perfect places, but I want to suggest that perhaps we've done the same thing in our abandonment of common sense and chase after right-wing capital. We have destroyed the market for wood. By giving the multinationals utter control over all of the wood. And those of us who want to do a good job could never, the coldest day, could never do a good job because we can't get paid enough for the product of our labor. And just like the people in Vietnam, we have to come up with a different tenure system that allows for somewhat of a free market and for some personal investment and caring into land. Land is not a sawmill. The tenure system has worked beautifully to produce the most productive sawmills and pulp mills in the world. One of the reasons why the Americans make so many jobs per 1,000 board feet is because they're so damned inefficient. The average American sawmill only has 6 workers and they pay a minimum wage. It's not automatically better somewhere else than it is here. Our sawmill industry and pulp mill industry have been made tremendously efficient by the quota system, but it has destroyed forestry, and it has destroyed the incentive to grow trees. So I would argue that after we counted up our assets and took care of them, we would put some of those assets into control of some people who cared about them, like communities, like loggers in the woodlot system. We would allow corporations to have some of the quota, but not all of the quota. We would create a mix of control of the land, and those of us who log wood could work for a mix of employers. And when we took our wood down to the corner, we would sell it for a fair dollar. I guess you can skip all the rest of this. I just want to say the solution is either real easy or real hard, dependent on the question of fear or optimism. It's dependent on whether you think we're just 5 minutes from the end of the game or just one election from the beginning. Thank you for coming. Before you leave, I want to say thank you to every single person who came here and spoke, many of whom are not used to it, and all of whom are the best people I can possibly imagine. Thank you.